To really understand where FNAF was meant to end, we have to go back to the beginning. It's 2014 and Scott Cawthon releases the first Five Nights at Freddy's. There were no books yet, no movies planned, no spin-offs, just a single developer game and a fan base discovering its universe in real time. The haunting calls from the phone guy, the missing kids, the newspaper clippings. It wasn't just jump scares. It was a breadcrumb trail. It felt planned, contained, and finite. But for FNAF players and the creator itself, FNAF 1 obviously wasn't supposed to be the end of the story. There were far too many loose ends, and many of the Easter eggs and stories felt incomplete. Plus, Scott Cawthon never wanted FNAF 1 to be the ending. He could have made more money and provided more comfort to a story that was just beginning. So that's exactly what he did. FNAF 2 arrived just months later, bigger, louder, and far more complex than the original. It dropped the timeline twist, a prequel, and suddenly the narrative expanded. We weren't just trapped in a single pizzeria anymore. We were diving into a deeper history of Fazbear Entertainment, into scandal and cover-ups, to experiments with animatronic AI and children going missing. However, FNAF 2 still didn't feel like a complete story, having more questions raised than answers. Who was the purple guy we saw in the FNAF minigame? What was the bite of 87 the phone guy was talking about? Well, Scott wasn't done just yet. In 2015, FNAF 3 released, and for the first time we see what looks very much like a true ending. Years after the original event, Fazbear's Fright brings the horrors of the past out as a cheap thrill for teens and tourists. The spirits, however, remain restless. The murderer returns inside the Springtrap suit, and at the end, the attraction burns. The newspaper epilogue implies closure. The unsolved mysteries of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza may finally be laid to rest. The souls are freed, Springtrap is destroyed, or so we believe at the time. In terms of narrative, this was a complete ending. The killer faced consequences, the spirits moved on, evil was burned out of the world. And for many fans, including heavily discussed posts at the time, this felt like the design's final trilogy. Scott even hinted back that this may have been the end of the story. If FNAF 3 had been the last game, the franchise would have ended as a compact horror masterpiece. 3 games, 1 story, tragedy, escalation, and justice. But the fact was that FNAF 3 had some of the worst jump scares in the original 4 games. Scott and fans noticed that the jump scares were very basic in design, and the idea that only one animatronic was trying to kill you was a little bit unsatisfying to the players. So the story went inward. FNAF 4 released later the same year, and that's a major pivot point because FNAF 4 was the first moment the community collectively said, wait, this has to be the ending, right? This game went personal. It left security cameras and office doors behind and entered nightmares, childhood trauma, and the bite of 83. It answered origin-level questions, framed the emotional foundation of the series, and focused not on Fazbear Entertainment as a company, but the family and horror behind it. Players suffered with a child reliving memories and terror every night, and the series' brutality reached an emotional peak. You could draw a line here. This game closes the loop backwards, completing the myth in both directions. And here's the truth, Scott did actually intend to stop here originally. At the moment in development and community conversation, FNAF 4 was talked about as the final chapter. It was marketed that way. It felt final. It looked final. But the series still had more stories to tell, not because it needed to, but because the universe had become too rich to abandon. Enter Sister Location in 2016, and suddenly the story shifts yet again. Not retreading the pizzeria-haunted hallways, but branching out into new facilities, robotics, technology, secret underground lab. This wasn't just a haunted restaurant anymore. This was an entire industry of horror. It introduces new animatronics, a confirmed protagonist, Michael Afton, the Afton family's tragedy, and a direct human focus. It was no longer just about ghosts and metal bodies. It was about the family behind the nightmare and the consequences of one man's obsession. At this point, it became clear FNAF hadn't ended, it had evolved. The tone changed, the lore deepened, and what once felt like a trilogy with an epilogue now felt like a saga. Which leads us to the next huge ending point, the one most fans consider the true planned finale of the entire FNAF storyline, FNAF Pizzeria's Simulator, often called FNAF 6. This game plays you with charm and humor at first, a happy pizzeria sim, but beneath the surface, it slowly reveals itself as a trap, a final plan, a combination of years of horror. Michael Afton lures every haunted animatronic, the original victims, his father William Afton, the creations of Sister Location into one place, and they all burn. The tape's monologue tells you the truth. This wasn't a game, it was a cleansing, a sacrifice. Michael dies to end the nightmare. The spirits are finally set free. The remnant-driven horror that began all the way back with the missing children comes to a definitive conclusion. And in that moment, the story ends. Every loose thread pulls together: family tragedy, haunted machines, the sins of a father, the redemption arc of the son. The evil empire collapses in fire. A hero sacrifices himself. The dead find rest. And here's the wild part. This absolutely was the intended ending. Scott himself confirmed at the time that the main storyline had concluded. The core saga was finished. If nothing else had been released afterward, FNAF would have gone down as a tightly closed horror narrative, a complete cycle of cause and consequence. But the world didn't stop turning. Virtual reality was booming. New technology created new storytelling tools, and with that idea, the series stepped beyond its own ending into a meta-existence. Help Wanted introduced the notion of a corrupted digital presence, the idea that even if the physical horrors burned away, evil could still survive through code, obsession, and the recreation of old nightmares. William Afton returned in a new form, not physically, but as a virus, a digital ghost. And suddenly, the series had entered a second phase, not an extension of the old story, but a transformation of it. But now's the question, was Help Wanted supposed to be the end? Well, clearly not. It was a game that made the ending of the last game not an ending, and obviously wanted to add more questions than closure. And sadly, from here on out, Scott never tries to end the series ever again with any other FNAF game mentioned. This brings us to Security Breach, a massive scale shift opening the doors into a Neon City-like entertainment complex, telling a story in a new era where Fazbear Entertainment didn't disappear, it reinvented itself. Not because the original tragedy didn't matter, but because in the world of FNAF, corporations don't die, and clearly neither do Springtrap. So they bury the past and build something bigger. And again, Afton rises, this time as a corrupted digital entity, echoing his refusal to ever rest. So, where did FNAF end? Truthfully, it ended multiple times, each one a valid stopping point depending on perspective. It ended in FNAF 3 for players who saw the ghost freed and the killer punished. It ended in FNAF 4 for those who believed the emotional origin story was the closure to the tragic loop. It ended in Pizzeria Simulator for those who experienced the fire, the sacrifice, and the final redemption. The most complete and confirmed ending of the original saga. And then it ended again spiritually when Scott retired and passed the torch, marking the end of the creator era and the dawn of a studio-driven continuation. Yet every time the story tried to conclude, something pulled it back. Sometimes it was fan passion, sometimes expanding lore, sometimes new creative opportunities and technology. But the thread that connects every ending to every new beginning is simple. FNAF is a story about things that refuse to stay buried, about trauma that lingers, about evil that finds new form. In that way, the endless continuations aren't a mistake, they're the point. As viewers and fans, we experience this franchise not as a line with a clean final period, but as a cycle, memory, tragedy, rebirth, and horror echoing through time, technology, and storytelling. The question isn't whether FNAF should have stopped at one of its endings. The real question is, how many times can a nightmare end before it becomes a legend instead? And maybe, in a world where animatronics keep waking up, where Fazbear Entertainment rises from fame into infamy to corporation reinvention, and where a killer refuses to stay dead across fire, metal, and now code. Maybe endings were never really the point. Maybe the point was survival, not just the characters, but the story itself. So while Pizzeria Simulator remains the clearest narrative finale, the place where the original tale truly completed its arc, FNAF lives on. Not as a story that overstayed its welcome, but as one that evolved from a ghost story into a myth, and a myth into a digital age legend. And in the end, maybe that's the most fitting conclusion. A horror that keeps breathing, a franchise that can end several times and still return, a monster that refuses to stay in the grave. Not because it can't die, but because we never stopped asking it to haunt us one more time. But this is the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the world of FNAF, endings are never really endings. They're just pauses before the lights eventually flicker back on. This is Buff Ben, and I will see you guys next time. See ya.